and preach through the same series that we've been on as an excuse, or we're a little shy sometimes about preaching about patriotism. But I want to share with you some personal experience this morning and also encourage you. I hope to stir you up. That's my goal today, to see that we still need patriots, particularly in God's army. And we're going to use the example of those who fought and some who died to secure our independence. Tomorrow we celebrate that we are still free, and thank those that had the courage to stand up and to announce to the world their patriotism. I still remember the day we took our son to West Point. They gave us 2 minutes to say goodbye. The next time we saw him, he was in the uniform of a cadet at West Point. And I don't know how they do it, but somehow they had taught him a maneuver where all of those who were to take the oath were separated from the rest of the group and came forward. And I remember watching my son take this oath. Those of you that are veterans here today, you probably remember this. However you ended up in the military, at some point or other, they asked you to take this oath. I, and then whichever name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. I want us to see that those who have made that oath really wrote a blank check to our government for however long their service was advertised to be. They basically said, send me where you want to send me. Train me in any way that you want. And I remember how I felt as a parent. My wife and I both had tears in our eyes because we were proud of our son John, but we were also terrified because we didn't know who would be giving the orders to our son, whether they would see him as being as special as we thought that he was. And we didn't know where our government was going to send him. There were a lot of different hot spots in the world. He ended up going to Kosovo and was in several firefights over there. But I think down deep inside, both Carol and I realized that this could result, the decision, the pledge that he had made could result in injury, maybe even death. We have here in our own county, over in Crestline, a young man who graduated from the United States Military Academy and lost both legs over in Crestline. And so it does happen. And the thought, we both expressed the thought later that it almost seemed when we heard John take that oath that that was the definitive moment when we felt like we had lost our son. We no longer controlled his future. We no longer had any influence over it. We felt like we had taken our son and handed him to this big machine called the U.S. military, and we've all seen times when that didn't turn out so well for folks, and so we were proud of him, but we had mixed feelings on that day. I think we were going over the mountain to come back to Ohio and got the last glimpse of the cadets heading back to their barracks. And we had to pull over the side of the road because the driver had too many tears in his eyes. And so did his mom. I stand before you today not as a veteran. I admire them tremendously. I thought for a long time in my life I was going to be a veteran in the military service, but never got called, and decided to join the Army of the Lord and see what I could do with my talents in that area. And but I tremendously respect patriots. I believe that every veteran is a patriot. You might say, well, I didn't enlist, I was drafted. Well, you still made the decision to show up. You didn't head off to Canada or some other way or some of the other options that were available to avoid having to answer that. When your country called, you answered that call, and we're very, very proud of you, and I'm proud to know you as veterans. So I'm not a veteran. Carol never served in the military, but we are a patriotic family. Carol can trace her ancestors clear back to men who actually fought in the War of Independence. As you enter the main gate of the Brush Ridge Cemetery, northwest of Marion, if you go to the first allotment or plot that they have there right inside the gate, I was shocked to discover that an ancestor of mine named Chuck Speece, believe it or not, with my same name, fought for the Union in the Civil War. And ironically, he has 2 gravestones. The one was given by the country, and it's a rather small, inconspicuous one that says he was a Civil War veteran. And then there's the monument that the family put up for him. And so I have some background in both sides of our family. We had veterans involved in some of the major conflicts that our country was involved in. I think it's important that we understand that patriots are more than just soldiers, although the Bible is very clear about the fact that there are many things about serving in the army of God that is very similar to being a veteran in the military service. We've already shared one, and that's the oath that everyone is required to make. But I'd like to call your attention this morning to 2 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 12. There the Apostle Paul is writing to his son in the faith, and he's encouraging him to get involved in this conflict. I'm sorry, I said 2 Timothy, I misspoke. It's 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 12. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says to his son about being a patriot. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of eternal life to which you were called, in which you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses, in the sight of God who gives to everything, and of Christ Jesus, who, testifying before Pontius Pilate, made that same good confession. You see, the veterans among us this morning aren't the only ones that pledged an oath or that made a statement before witnesses. We did. If you're a Christian here today, you also made that good confession. And just like the oath that they asked our military to take, we in the church also require people to stand up publicly and to declare that they've decided to be what? Enlist in the army of God. And that oath is just as important because we make it to the Lord. And so whether you served in the military or not, you are a veteran, or at least currently involved in the army of God. There are some things that took place in order to secure our freedom that I want to go back a little bit. I'm a kind of a history buff, and so I think sometimes we have a tendency to forget these things. But I just have 3 little points, and I have the rest of it printed for you. Dan did a good job of trying to understand my chicken scratching and getting it out in outline form on the back of your bulletin. We probably won't get to all of that, but I want you to see that the things that we ask of our military are also things that are mentioned as being things that we need, the way we respond to those who have the rule over us, that are over us, and God says we're to respect them. The way we dress, there's a certain dress that the Bible talks about. Helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith, those kind of things. So there are what you might call combat armament, because we're in a war. And anybody that listens to the news at all knows that we're in a very antagonistic culture war that is not necessarily making it easy to be a Christian, not making it easy to live in our world. But I have 3 real quick points, because since Dan's here this morning, I'm going to prove to him that I can get done in about 20 minutes, and I'll probably take 30. And I know that this is a holiday weekend, and although it shouldn't only be about grilling and hot dogs and hamburgers and all that, you may have places to go, so I'll try to respect that this morning. The first thing that I note from history is that patriots make bold statements. If you want to know whether you're a patriot in the army of God, when was the last time you let all your friends and you let all the witnesses and let the people that you work with know what you believe? I think it's incredible that we've forgotten that there were only about 3 million people in our country when they declared independence from the most awesome military adversary that there ever had been, and in the British Empire, and they had enough ships. They were the only country in the world that could take the war to any country that wanted to declare its independence or its stand against England. And of those 3 million people, we sometimes forget that Patrick Henry stood up and said, "Give me liberty and give me death." But earlier on in his speech, he said, if 3 million of us, which was all that lived in the 13 colonies, was about 3 million people, stand together and fight, there's no nation in the world that can beat us. Now, Patrick Henry knew good and well that a third of the people of the country, so there goes 1 million, were very loyal to England, and they were called Tories by the colonials. And Patrick Henry knew that he couldn't count on that million people, so now we're down to 2. And then just like today, so many people are indifferent to what's going on. Even God's people don't realize we're in a war. That the outcome and the future of the Church of Jesus Christ depends upon how well we handle it. It's been passed on to us by a number of the senior saints that have passed on, and now it's our turn. And we've been entrusted with this beautiful gift of salvation and the church and the difference it's made in our world. And God says, stand up, be a patriot, make a bold prediction. But in Patrick Henry's day, about 1 million, about a third of the population, didn't care whether the Patriots won, whether the United States was independent or stayed as a colony of the British Empire. And so there goes another 1 million. So now you're down to a third of your population that gives a hoot whether you win the war or not. And yet he made the bold statement to say, give me liberty or give me death. He knew that there were a third of the people that were going to hate him for making that statement, for being part of the 56 men that gathered and signed that Declaration of Independence. But he didn't care. Because he was a patriot, he was passionate. He believed so strongly and loved his country so much that he was willing to make those outlandish statements, those loud proclamations. And brothers and sisters in Christ, I don't mean to pick on me, you, or any of us here, but we as the church have been too timid. We spent too much time explaining to ourselves why we can't get the job done, or why the world has changed, or about our opposition, and we focus so much on the fact that, well, if I say that or take that stand, there's going to be a lot of people that will really hate me. I might have some enemies. But the patriot realizes that's part of being a patriot. And these guys were outnumbered. At no time did they ever go into a battle where they outnumbered the enemy. In fact, normally it was 3 to 5, in some cases 10 to 1. 400 Patriots died on Bunker Hill because they were outnumbered. There just wasn't enough of them to hold the day. But they understood that's the nature of a patriot. And I guess what I'm trying to say to us is, if we're going to be patriots in the army of God, we need to quit focusing on the fact that we might make enemies. We need to quit focusing on the fact that, the community might not be too thrilled with us if we take a particular stand. These guys didn't care. And they were willing to make those bold protections. Maybe it's time that in the church we stand up in that helmet of salvation and that shield of faith and that sword of the Spirit and start standing for the truth, whether it makes us popular or not. There's been a lot of people and a lot of churches that I've been involved with, but when I was a kid, I went to the Caledonia Church of Christ. And at that time, they had a very legalistic, conservative leadership. And even though I didn't agree with every stand that they made, I respected the fact that they had the courage to take that stand. And so I call on our leadership, and I call on us as a church to select leadership with the gumption to take a bold stand for the truth. And if that causes people not to like us, if that causes us to be viewed as the pariah of the community, I think you'll be surprised how many people will at least respect our passion and our willingness to stand for the truth. So it's important for us to see that passion is involved in being a patriot, especially in the army of God. When was the last time that we were passionate about the church? When was the last time that we we sang some songs today that always kind of bring a tear to my eye, because I feel passionately about this country. I feel passionately about this church and about any church. I want to be a patriot. So they understood that they were going to be in the minority and always would be the underdog in every fight, but they served anyway. And lo and behold, that passion carried them through to ultimate victory. The second thing I want to share with you this morning about patriots, and if you're a veteran, you're one of them, because you chose to serve. You chose to put your life on hold for a few years to do what Uncle Sam wanted you to do, to go to his training. You probably, if you enlisted at least, or if you were drafted, you probably didn't know what part of the world you might be serving in. You probably didn't know what job you would have in the Army unless you enlisted and they promised you a particular specialty. But it's important for us to see that you basically said, send me where you want me to go and use me in any way that you want. That's a real commitment. That's passion for your country. And I think in the church, we need to get to the point where we realize there are going to be some things about serving as a patriot that aren't going to be pleasant. It might not be our preferred place to serve. It may not be where we would prefer to go as far as the country. I don't ever think Vietnam ever ended up on the vacation spot list of the world, and yet a lot of people served there, and they knew what it was to deal with the heat and the bugs and the swamps and the water. But you see, they had made that pledge, and they meant it passionately, and so they served to the end of their tour. And I really think we in the church need to realize that nowhere that I know of in this book does it tell us that we only need to serve in the army of God and, until we decide it's time to retire. I don't read it anywhere in here that God says, well, you know, you've put in your time, you've taught your number of young people, you've gone out and represented the church and called for the church and so forth, and so, you know, you're getting along in age, just kind of sit back and take it easy. Bible doesn't promise that. Our tour is lifelong in the army of God, and that takes passion. When you get up in the morning and you feel the arthritis and you're not overly motivated to get up and to go out and serve in the army of God, it's not easy. But God's tour in this life never ends. And we need to understand that, and we need to be passionate about that there's no time to retire when it comes to our service in the army of God. Patriots pay a high price for making those outlandish statements. All of them ended up on a list of people to be hung if they were captured. 9 of the 56 men died in battle. 2 of them were captured, taken as prisoners of war, and never seen again. Probably dropped overboard somewhere, hung and dropped overboard from a British ship heading back to England, I imagine. 2 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence had their children killed in battle fighting for the cause. None of us wants to see our children predecease us, and yet 2 of those men did. 1 man, 12 of them ended up dying in poverty because they were passionate about the cause, so they gave all of their money and they sold all of their possessions in order to keep the army at Valley Forge fed. And those 12 men died in poverty. One of the men, the British had found out that his wife was dying, and they surrounded his house because they wanted to capture one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he had some tunnels dug, and he was able to leave, but he had to leave the bedside of his dying wife. He lived for a year in caves and in the woods, and when he could finally come back to his house, he found that his house had been burnt down, all of his buildings had been burnt. His 13 children he never saw again. He didn't know what happened to them. They had scattered. And it was too much for him, and within a week, he died from exhaustion because he was passionate. Patriots not only make outlandish declarations, they pay a high price. And you know, if we're going to serve in the army of God, we're going to suffer some casualties. People are going to die. We've had missionaries like Lois Ryan and others. I wish I had more names, but I don't remember like I used to, that were on the mission fields in Africa and were killed by revolutionaries because they didn't like what they were teaching. If you're a patriot, you're going to pay a high price. And these 56 men certainly did. The last one of them that I will mention was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. If you ever get a chance to go to Yorktown, go there to the battlefield, and you will see a reconstructed house. His house was where the British General Cornwallis made his headquarters, and Washington was reluctant to bombard that house because he knew it was one of the signers with him of the Declaration of Independence. And that man walked over to Washington and he said, if the enemy is there, that's where you fire your artillery. He gave him permission to destroy and bomb his own house because he was passionate and he realized that patriots always pay a high price. Jesus said, unless you deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me, you can't be one of my loyal followers. And I think it's high time we get that passion back to see that it's going to cost us. It may cost us everything. It may cost us our family. It may cost us our life. But God says, you've made a good confession. The thing I like about Patriots is they realize what the ultimate cost may be. There wasn't one of those young men standing on the plains at West Point that didn't realize that he may have signed his death warrant by making that pledge. And I think we need to realize that it's not just enough to have words. Paul reminded Timothy that he stood up and made the good confession before witnesses, but there's more to serving in the army than just taking the oath. It's more than just words. It's putting action to those words. It's putting up with the training that isn't always pleasant. It's putting up with the drill instructor. It's putting up with serving in areas that wouldn't be on your vacation list. But they understand that patriots pay a high price. Always have, always will. And in the church, we need a few casualties. We need people who will be willing to stand up for truth, even regardless of the cost. The third thing I want to say very quickly, and then I want to end. Patriots reap a great reward. Not all of them live to see it, but a number, at least half of those 56 men, ended up as their reward. They had a free and independent country. Man, when it comes to serving in the army of the Lord, folks, it's not enough to just confess, make that confession before witnesses. What have we done since to prove that we meant what we said? What have you sacrificed? What have I sacrificed because we've chosen to be a patriot? How many times have we picked up that shield of faith and that sword of the Spirit and gone out outnumbered in a world where it seems like nobody else is too concerned about truth? The big thing in our country is you got to be tolerant. You got to be tolerant. You got to be tolerant. Well, you know what? I think it's time for the church to stand up and say, where the Bible speaks, we're not going to be tolerant. We're going to take a stand for truth, and we'll pay the cost. The third thing that happens from that is God fights on your side, especially in the army of God. He likes people like that. Remember Joshua? The 10 spies came back. Oh, we're like grasshoppers. We can't do it. Joshua stands up and said, look, yeah, they're big. But as for me, you decide. But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. That's an outlandish statement. But God likes people like that, with passion, that will make those kind of statements and then back it up with their lives and their service and their blood and their sweat. God gets real excited about those kind of people. On the back of your bulletin, you'll find what's expected of soldier. First of all, whether you like BDUs or not, or like whatever they're calling them now, the Army loves all those acronyms. You know, they like the BDU for battle dress uniform. Whether you like the uniform or not, when you sign on, you'll wear it. Larry, you look good in your sailor's uniform, I thought. You agree when you sign on, whether it's enlistment or you're drafted to serve wherever they send you, we've already alluded to that, to serve in whatever capacity they think you're most fit or wherever they have a need, to be accountable to those who outrank you, to serve your entire tour. You can't decide after 90 days that, this Patriot thing just really isn't my thing. I think I'm ready to go home now. They get a real big laugh out of that because it's understood when you sign on the dotted line, whether you enlist or you're drafted, you're going to be there you're going to serve your entire tour in most cases. And then to act consistent with the uniform code of military justice. This is the code of the army of God. And as long as you act in a way as a patriot in the army of God, that this book, this code, says you'll be all right. You won't get into trouble. I want to close my sermon today with this one thought. Had the opportunity to lead a tour over to Israel I don't know how long it's been, probably 25 years ago now. The years have certainly flown away, but one of the places we were privileged to go, and if you were on that trip, you probably remember, was Masada. Masada lies by the Dead Sea, and it was where the last of the Jewish people, after a 2-year fight, finally, they ended up committing mass suicide rather than surrender to the Romans, and because the walls were almost broken in. And our tour guide on that particular day took us to a spot in the center of that rock, and he said, here's where the bonfire is built. I thought, bonfire? You know, you looked around, all there was sand and rock. Where in the world do they get the wood for the bonfire? When you become an enlistee or drafted into the Israeli army, and all of those folks without a medical deferment they serve like 15, 20 years subject to call up in the Israeli army, but they bring them all after their basic training, they bring them to Masada. And they build this big bonfire. And all these people getting ready to start serving and defending their nation. And they lead them in a chant that basically says, Masada will never fall again. You think that doesn't make an impression on those Israeli soldiers and airmen and naval officers that, yes, this rock fell once to the enemy, but it will never happen on our watch. Masada will never fall again. Brothers and sisters in Christ, I want to just encourage you, if you've been a Christian for a few years, to get that passion back. I think we need to let the Lord see that we have that same conviction that the church will not fail on our watch. It's not going to happen. Doesn't matter how much sweat, how much effort, how much money, how much pain. It's just not going to happen, because we will pay any price. We will surmount any challenge to make sure that our church and that the church in the world is passed on to the next generation. When we get that kind of a patriotic attitude, I believe that God is standing there ready to give us our requests. He's ready to bless that kind of a patriot attitude. So I ask you today, the astronauts, they called it the right stuff. Do you have the right stuff to be an astronaut? I want to ask you today, do you have the right stuff to be a patriot in the army of God? I hope you've got the grit and the passion and the determination and the understanding to know that it's not just about words. It's great that you made the good confession. Now what are you going to do? You see, we still would not be living in a free country if these patriots of old didn't understand that it's more than just words. You can't just write out a Bill of Rights, or not a Bill of Rights, but a Declaration of Independence. You've got to back it up. Brothers and sisters in Christ, where will we sign in blood that the church will succeed and exist on our watch? I hope you think about that tomorrow when you're eating your hot dogs or your hamburgers, and ask yourself, do you have the right stuff? Do I have the right stuff? I pray, God, that we do, because we're in a war, and God expects us to win that war. It's a war for truth, and a war for what's right, and a war that is for our children. I can't imagine a culture without the church. But it's been placed in our hands. We're the patriots. Are we going to serve with passion? Are we going to pay the price? That's what I'm thinking about this Independence Day holiday, and I hope that you'll consider those things as well.
The song goes way back, which means probably half of you will remember it. It may not be on the mountain's height over the stormy sea. It may not be at the battle's front, my Lord will have need of me. But if by a still small voice he calls to pass, I do not know. I'll answer, dear Lord, with my hand in thine. I'll go where you want me to go. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord, over mountain or plain or sea. I'll say what you want me to say, dear Lord. I'll be what you want me to be. There's surely somewhere a lonely place in earth harvest field so wide, where I may labor through life's short day for Jesus the crucified.